Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday. So that's all I really need to tell you. It's Wednesday, September 8th, 2021. We're live for another show. Again, usually that's no help when you're hearing it on tape, but you're not right now hearing it on tape. See, it can't happen now. Later on today, of course, you'll be able to hear things on tape, and this new program will become eligible for use as a rerun in the future, but that's not what's happening now. We're back on the air. I know it's been a rough patch. August was rough. We were off the air for 2 weeks, at least live, and then we had some interruptions, and now we have holidays, and we're going to have more holidays next week, right about this time, I guess next Thursday. So, look, these are the things we live with. And, okay, well, we're ready to roll out another show. There's plenty to catch up on, of course. We were off the air live-wise, anyway, on Friday, and then again on Monday for Labor Day, and yesterday for the holiday. So it's been a little while. Greg is preparing his raft of stories, and he's got the abbreviated pundit roundup ready to go. So we'll catch up on what happened over the weekend, some of which, we can catch up with just by chatting here and now. For instance, so let's see. We'll almost certainly be talking about the Texas governor's comments over the weekend. I guess they finally got around to actually signing their crazy abortion bill into law over the weekend, and the governor asked, presumably by a reporter, hey, what do you say to the people who say that this new law, among the other crazy things that they hate about it, is that there's no exception, as, used to be the case, the tradition, whenever Republicans passed a restriction, they would have exceptions to the bans or restrictions on abortion in cases, they used to say, it was a well-known phrase, rape, incest, or life of the mother. And it was interesting that there was a stock phrase that just sort of, offhandedly encompassed, three of the hugest threats to women. Just, oh yeah, by the way, in case any of these gigantic threats to the lives of women happen, which is kind of frequent, well, then we'll have exceptions. But then, of course, they began to realize that made them, made them look like they were weak and compromisers to their base. And once compromise became a dirty word for the Republican base, it became the new tradition to blow right past those things and write new abortion restriction or ban laws that intentionally didn't have those exceptions written into them. And this one doesn't. That's the new trend. And someone said, essentially, don't you feel, I don't know what words they use for it, but the idea was, and you might as well just ask it this way, don't you feel like a total a-hole for encouraging and signing a bill that would, in this case, would force, in lots of cases, but in this case too, force women who had been raped and had become pregnant that way to carry their rapist's baby to term, unless, of course, they find out about it 2 weeks before they're really able to find out about it, et cetera, et cetera. All that aside, he was asked about that, and hey, he had a great idea, probably the best idea I think he's ever proposed, which was, don't worry about that. That won't happen because we're going to eliminate rape, which great. I don't know why you waited, quite honestly, but of course, you probably can't do that. I'd encourage you to try. And, of course, the problem is that you have no idea really what you're saying. I don't know. Maybe that was a slip of the tongue for the guy. They're going to crack down on rape. All well and good. I'm glad they're going to try and do that. Again, you probably could have reached that conclusion on your own without abortion really being brought into it. Like, a lot of people wake up in the morning and it might not be the first thing they think of, but if you ask them about rape, they'll say, oh, bad thing. We should be cracking down on it, as opposed to being prompted to do it in exchange for something you want. Like, I'll make a trade for getting rid of rape. But anyway, of course, you can't just eliminate rape. And in his own description of how he was going to eliminate rape, he said, well, when people rape people, we'll go out there and find them. We'll do everything we can to find them and arrest them and punish them, which doesn't eliminate rape. It just eliminates unsolved rapes, which is also a step forward. I'll take it, but, also probably nonsense. And probably he doesn't even mean that he's really going to do anything anyway. He just wants to get out of the situation. And then he didn't, because that's just how dumb he is. Anyway, there's that. I believe a large portion of the weekend was spent by conservatives, again, still trying to insist that they could convince everyone that there weren't any people eating horse medication to get their ivermectin. You know the story, the background of it by now. But the latest rage over the weekend became conservatives insisting that this wasn't happening and it was liberals making it up in order to make conservatives look bad. And it had a lot of twists and turns to it, this little saga. But I just wanted to comment on that because the idea, that you could stand there and say, well, the liberals are making things up. They're not eating horse medicine. Ignores all of the previous evidence of them drinking their fish tanks. I mean, this has become a thing with Republicans. I guess it becomes, I think they think that they're beating the system. And I almost understood it when vaccines weren't yet available, or at least not widely available, or in this brief period when there was a big craze for getting vaccinated, but you couldn't get it whenever you wanted it because there was a huge demand for it and a whole system of who was going to be allowed for it. And people were panicking and worried about getting COVID before they got a chance to get vaccinated. And then when they circulated the rumor that hydroxychloroquine worked to do anything at all, people said, I read on the internet that somebody said that's an ingredient in something I shouldn't be eating. But, ignore all the other stuff in there. It's got hydroxychloroquine. Let's eat it anyway. So fish medication was all the rage for a little while, and then that died off. Essentially, Donald Trump, got interested in something else and stopped talking about hydroxychloroquine and tried to overthrow the government of the United States instead. And then since then, that's fallen by the wayside. I assume there's still some hardcore believers in hydroxychloroquine out there somewhere. Ivermectin became the hot thing. Can't get it because no one will prescribe it for you because you need to, be ill with parasites for a real doctor to do it. They wouldn't do it. Somebody discovered it was in horse medicine. It's also in, sheep, drench, different forms, yada, yada. Anyway, Connor Friersdorf, right? I think, who I think writes for The Atlantic, spent the bulk of his weekend insisting that it was liberal, coastal, elitist thing to do to make fun of people eating horse medicine to get their ivermectin, because really, you Eastern liberals, you're out of touch with what goes on in the heartland. And in real America, where you're living out in the hinterlands, God's country, and you're miles and miles from the nearest store, let alone the nearest pharmacy, everybody knows that the real salt of the earth people, look, you need ivermectin. You're going to get the horse medication and you're going to take it. And you might be really smart. You're even a chemist. And you know that a horse weighs more than you do and you can recalculate things and safely take it. Ivermectin is used in humans, not in this form or in these dosages, but we can figure it all out. And isn't it really rather elitist that they're making fun of the people who are just trying to make ends meet and make do out in rural America? And then he spent the weekend deluged by people who are, I live there right now. I'm born and raised there. Never lived anywhere else. I'm in as rural a place as you can think of. And it's hugely insulting that you think we don't know how to go to Walmart or use a mail order pharmacy, or that we wouldn't drive 25 miles into town to pick up medication that's meant for humans, and that we just steal our medication off our horses, and that we routinely buy our medication at the feed store. But I think he's persisted. He's pretty sure that the real anti-rural bias is the people saying that ordinarily people don't take their livestock's medication. So, all right, that's where conservative America is now, I guess, if Connor Friersdorf is any indication, which maybe he's not. But they keep insisting that they're not eating the horse paste, and then I keep seeing TikTok after TikTok of people eating the horse paste or injecting the sheep drench and the cattle wash and various other things. And if it's got an animal in the package, it's just not for you. Sorry. Whatever. Okay, that's it for the internet crazes of the moment. Greg Dworkin is here with actual news, unless, some of the news is about internet crazes. That's fine too.
Well,
Good morning,
let's just finish this idea about ivermectin. Right. I mean, the whole point that Connor Fried, whatever his name is, he's a libertarian. He's not a conservative. He's just a nut job.
Oh, okay.
And, his point is
fair enough.
That, when you're out in the boondocks and you're not close to a Grubhub delivery service from Brooklyn, New York, you have to make do with the land.
Yes.
Right? And that's what he's trying to say. See, the problem with this, I mean, what is ivermectin? Ivermectin is an antiparasitic drug. You can use it to treat river blindness or even intestinal roundworm. And so what Connor Friedersdorf is saying is that out in the real America, where you don't need a doctor, you're perfectly capable in your home lab that's in part of the barn of diagnosing river blindness and therefore treating yourself with livestock medicine. That's what he's saying.
Sure.
And, that makes perfect sense if you're an idiot.
Aha. Well, now we know who the sector that he's talking to. Yeah, I
mean, if you're so far out that you can't get medication sent to you by parcel post or carrier pigeon or wherever you get your mail, how are you going to get livestock medicine? And if you're in a position where you can reach a store that sells livestock medicine, you can reach a pharmacy and get regular medicine. So, I mean, again, his whole point is stupid, and it's condescending, and it's J.D. Vance level of let's make fun of the hillbillies, except make it in terms that it's really the elite's fault. I'm the one doing it, but I'll blame it on New York and California.
Right. Which, by the way, is where he was born and raised. He's not rural. Connor Friedersdorf, so
he's full of crap. I mean, none of it makes any sense.
Less of it now because they crapped his brains out with the ivermectin. But
right, and let's just say he didn't do well over the weekend with that particular exchange. But of
he's
course,
sticking to it.
Never back down, double up, triple up, because that's what you do.
Yep. Well, so a lot of people found it pretty insulting that the supposed defenders of the rural lifestyle were pretty sure that most rural Americans really, as a matter of course,
who they are not, but speak for,
yes,
will somehow rise in their defense, which makes no sense whatsoever.
J.D. Vance mentioned
in this abbreviated segment for me, for me because I have to be out of here by 9:45.
I didn't realize.
Really, originally 10 years ago, it was like a 20-minute segment, which usually goes for an hour.
It's got all these 10
because I
years.
can't shut up and I don't let David talk. But looking at the big picture here, what the pundit roundup was focusing on. Well, the title is School and Mass Debates Heat Up.
Yes, okay.
And let me give you some samples here. New York Times, the masked professor, it's no superhero, he's not Zorro, versus the unmasked student. At university, some instructors are finding the return to the classroom a nerve-wracking experience if you have quit one in the middle of class. And so I think we covered that story. But there was a professor who came out of retirement to teach, and his students wouldn't wear masks, and they made fun of him, so he left.
Back in.
Right?
Yeah.
Hartford Current, the anger stage, frustration mounts as anti-maskers and anti-vaxxers get loud, while those following the rules watch gains against COVID erode. After nearly a year and a half of denial and depression, as thousands have died and almost everyone has had life severely disrupted, residents in Connecticut and across the country appear to have entered the anger stage of pandemic grief. Over recent months, as the state has suffered through yet another COVID surge, anti-vaccine and anti-mask activists have grown increasingly fervent, culminating August 25th in the protest that chased Ned Lamont from the event in Chester that he was at.
Oh, I didn't.
And Lamont was great. He just, didn't bat an eyelash. And one thing about corporate people is that they have a great poker face.
Oh.
They develop that so that your boss and your coworkers don't realize you're, trying to get their job and knife them in the back. So nobody knows what you're thinking. And so the anti-vaxxers, tried to get him to push back, he just sort of shrugged and got to the microphone and said, I really can't believe some of the language the mothers are using around their kids at this rally here. It's really something you really ought to think about because it's New England, and that's how you approach these things. If it were New York City, that approach wouldn't have worked.
Right. I can believe
Lamont would have said that, Governor, I got your protest right here,
Right, and that was the kid.
while you grab your loins and gird for battle. And, it just doesn't work. Obviously Florida is going terribly wrong. McSweeney's probably had the best bet, and I'd like permission to use the F word because it's like part of the whole story here. Well, it's the headline.
I mean, yeah, okay. It's in the headline, I guess.
In the headline. I mean, the headline is, oh my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
Well, now.
And that's basically the article. and every third word.
That was really pushing my permission. Yeah. All right. Well,
the vaccine won't make you magnetic. Are you effing kidding me? It just won't work. It's not even a thing. And that lady who tried to pretend the vaccine made her magnetic look like a real, an idiot. So
okay.
Just get vaccinated. Jesus. I mean, that's basically the story. And that about covers it.
Oh, was that like, I think I might have seen that one. Is it McSweeney's?
Yeah, I'll tell you what.
Okay.
I'll give it to you. And you can read it.
It's about 5 sentences out of the whole thing, I would think. Well, there it is. Okay.
Right?
I mean,
congratulations. If you're reading this essay, you're still alive. And if you're alive, you've either gotten the vaccine or you still have an opportunity to get the vaccine. And then it starts.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, they really went all the way to town on that one. Thanks.
I'd say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 F words in the first 2 sentences.
Yeah. And there's lots of variants.
Yeah. And that's just
exciting.
like a sample.
Right. But where? Okay. Well, I'll figure it out. I mean, I bet if I Google that, I'll find it.
I'll give you the link address. It's wonderful. In the Thunderground.
I'm afraid to see the URL. Holy cow. Okay. Yeah, McSweeney's, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, okay. Got it. All right. Well, if you want to read the F word a couple of different ways, that's a great place to go.
Here's Bloomberg, unfortunately, a paywall. Less fear, more fury on Hotline for Doctors, the physician support line founded by Philadelphia area psychiatrist Mona Massoud, has spoken with more than 3,000 doctors since March of last year, and some of its volunteers say they see the mood shifting, becoming more tinged with anger and hopelessness. What I'm hearing is people calling in and saying, I don't see the light. The hotline's 800 volunteers have often functioned like battlefield medics. Massoud says patching doctors up to send them back to the fight. Now, when we get calls, it's in what in psychiatry we call escape fantasies. It's I want out.
Yeah. Well, man. So
I mean,
they're ruining
that's the background behind reading about these orchestrated school attacks. I guess the latest, where was it, North Carolina? I can't remember, where 3 parents confronted a school principal with zip ties.
Yes, was it North Carolina? I read about it. Yeah, they burst into school and said they were going to affect the citizens' arrest.
This is all orchestrated stuff, and it's being pushed by fascists, basically.
Yes.
Speaking of fascists, every once in a while we try to remind people there's more in the world than the United States, and it looks like Brazil is trying to orchestrate their own military coup right now.
Well,
Bolsonaro is egging on fascist Nuremberg-style rallies and attacking the Supreme Court because they're standing in the way of him becoming president again and is trying to investigate him for corruption. So this is worldwide. This is something that's simply not going to go away, and it's well orchestrated here in this country. And just people need to be aware. It's not both sides do that. Both factions were at the school board speaking their points of view about what to do with masks. One of them, mostly Democrats, said that you really should wear a mask because it helps protect the kids in the community. And the other side, mostly Republicans, said we should string everybody up and we'll be the board. And they're both equal, and they both should get equal coverage and equal respect because both sides everything.
Well, 2 sides have said it, and one of them is, a major political party. So we have to print it as though it were real. Speaking of Brazil, I'll give you one quick headline. Jason Miller detained in Brazil for undemocratic activities. I see that among the most popular stories over on Daily Kos, the trending.
And I ask you, Jason Miller, who is a very close Trump aide, what's he doing in Brazil?
Right. It's the 51st
I was there on
state,
vacation because it's a COVID hotspot and, there's a probable coup brewing. And I just thought I'd stop by and take some pictures.
Right. Steve Bannon, I don't know if he's there, but Steve Bannon's been heavily involved in Brazil and advising Bolsonaro. It's about as close a relationship between the Trump camps and Bolsonaro camp as you could imagine. And I believe they gave them COVID early on, too.
Yeah. You know that famous meme with the boyfriend and girlfriend walking down the street, and the boyfriend turns and looks at the hot babe that's walking in the other direction, and everybody labels them.
Yes.
Right. And so Trump is the guy, and the one he's with is Hungary, and the one he's looking at is Argentina.
Yeah, they're just trying it everywhere that they can, I guess. Yes, this diary on it notes that I guess for some reason Donald Trump Jr. was supposed to be in Brazil, but he managed to find an excuse not to go, which is, I would say smart, but
and therefore it couldn't have been his own idea.
Right. Yeah. Well, somebody told him, like, we can't protect you from being arrested there, and you guys don't run the State Department anymore. I don't know that the Biden State Department is going to do a whole lot to get you out.
His lawyer probably told him to stay close to the grand jury.
Good idea. I mean, all right.
So and with all of the stories about what's going on with COVID and the potential for reasoned argument from both sides, equal, standing about what to do about massive vaccines. The story that's fallen out of the news is Afghanistan, because now that the cable news companies can't send their cameras there, it's like not as interesting. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's a hostage situation or a detainment situation or whatever you want to call it, where up north there's an airport with planes that were sitting on the ground because people cleared by the Americans for travel can't because the Taliban won't let them go. It's, doesn't sound like a good situation. Yeah. And yet the media is trying and failing to make it into a Jimmy Carter hostage situation. And they just don't have the video, and it's just not working for them.
It's pretty amazing.
In fact, WGBH has a piece. Dan Kennedy writes, what the media are getting wrong about Biden and Afghanistan. There's one dimension to the conflict that's still being fought, the role of the media in reporting on the President Joe Biden's management or mismanagement of the final chaotic and deadly weeks. Shortly, many journalists said Biden could have ensured a more dignified exit than a mad crush at Hamid Karzai International Airport, which I presume has been renamed by now. Yeah, probably maybe, Donald Trump Airport. With desperate Afghans plunging to their deaths from transport planes, culminating in last week's terrorist attack. Increasingly, though, others have been making the case that once Biden decided to end American involvement in Afghanistan once and for all, there was no alternative to the monumental ugliness it played out on TV. Biden doesn't deserve the cheap shots that critics have taken at him when they postulate that his administration screwed up what otherwise would have been an orderly withdrawal, writes Daniel McCarthy, a vociferous Biden critic and a conservative in the Spectator world. Even if the withdrawal had been much better executed, as indeed it should have been, it would have been a disgusting spectacle, ripe occasion for media posturing and partisan sniping. The end, or at least the temporary pause, of the liberal-leaning media honeymoon with Biden can be traced to systemic flaws in the way that the press covers Washington. 3 of those flaws have been on vivid display in recent weeks. First, media's primordial need for balance, for treating Democrats and Republicans as if they are both legitimate actors, even though the Democrats continue to act as a normal political party while the Republicans have descended into authoritarianism and lies. The media cling to both sidesism despite 4 years of a raging sociopath in the White House, and attempted insurrection by his supporters, and dangerous denialism about COVID-19. So they cover the things that we're talking about here. Thus, after 5 years of harshly negative coverage of Donald Trump, that he richly deserved, you can almost hear the press breathe a collective sigh of relief that they can finally go after Biden and even up the score. Right? Here's a data point that shows how ingrained this is. Last Friday, Amna Nawaz, filling in as anchor for PBS NewsHour, noted in a conversation with political analysts Jonathan Capehart and David Brooks that a number of Republicans have criticized Biden over his handling of the war. It runs the spectrum of Republicans. You have everybody from Ben Sasse to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Okay. And, of course, President Trump. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, the QAnon-adjacent conspiracy theorist from Georgia who continues to defend the insurrectionists. She's a duly elected member of Congress, and according to the both sides formula, she needs to be normalized. It's crazy, but that's the way the game is played. Too bad it's not a game. That's his writing, and that's right. Secondly, maybe it is a game, because in too many cases, the Washington Press Corps glides past the substance of an issue and wallows in the political implications. We see this all the time. It's Chuck Todd.
Yes.
Oh, I see that they've shot 19 people on the White House lawn, and it just might work.
Yes, or perhaps a week of coverage that why didn't we get the truth about Major Biden, the dog, biting someone?
The caricature version of this type of pundit is political analyst Chris Cillizza of CNN.
Oh.
Last week, several days before the terrorist attack, Cillizza wrote a piece that dwelled entirely on the political ramifications of Biden's decision to leave Afghanistan. Right? Biden's bet is while Afghanistan is top of mind for most voters right now, it'll fade when it's no longer the lead story.
Well,
right?
Yeah.
It's all politics. Biden has nothing going in terms of deciding it's the wrong move for America, that we've really wasted blood and treasure for 20 years, that his own son, who spent time in Iraq, and Biden, I saw one story written, feels that his brain tumor may have come from exposure to stuff that you get in the military, the old Agent Orange type syndrome. And that was part of his reason for trying to get American children out of Afghanistan when it wasn't needed to be there. And so my point is that Biden's motives for getting out of Afghanistan are quite detailed, conflicting, deep, subtle, nuanced, however you want to describe it. And it's a lot more than, well, I'm just figuring like in a month nobody will remember. Now, in a month, nobody will remember, but that's not the point. That's not why he's doing it, because it's all politics, right? And then the third is too many establishment journalists supposedly paid to cover the news rather than express their opinions. And I see on my clock it's 8:27.
Yes, that's right. I do see that as well.
We're in favor of the U.S. mission in Afghanistan and opposed to Biden's decision to end it once and for all. In other words, he's fighting the blob.
Yes.
And people like Peter Baker.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's...
Because if you quote Bush alum, they say that we should have stayed.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The music's still rolling with another 10, 15 seconds to go. But that's because we realized too late that it was almost time for a break. And we spent the break talking about you.
You know, I get the feeling that Jerry Seinfeld came up with the idea of Seinfeld just by listening to David and I over breakfast, chatting about stuff.
Yeah, well, it was a show about nothing, and that's what we're doing.
That's what our conversations were a lot of times, and they were great. So now we have them virtually, and we beam them out so everybody gets to listen. So
okay,
that's what I have to say in regard to the anger that's brewing on the rational side of America, which is about 3/4 of the country, in regard to wanting this pandemic behind us. And the anger with the 1/4 of the country that doesn't get it and isn't listening and doesn't read the news. And if they do, it's not the news that you and I are aware of. And that's why there's no common ground, and that's a problem.
Yes.
So we have that, but they don't seem to be in the mood to compromise, and neither do we. So we'll see what happens with that. One of the journalists on Twitter over the weekend asked the question, we've seen a lot of bad things that happen, the insurrection and COVID. And, can you imagine anything worse than what we've been experiencing the last year? And my answer was, Civil War.
Oh, right. If
that would be worse.
Think that we haven't been experiencing it, then sure.
I mean, active shooting civil war.
So okay. Well,
could be worse. That's what my grandmother always used to say. It could always be worse.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's hope it isn't.
All right.
So right now, the Democrats, still pretending that we're a united country and trying to govern for everybody, are in Washington in the month of September trying to figure out how to present a united front in regard to both reconciliation passage of Biden's domestic priorities and the bilateral infrastructure bill, which was negotiated by Senate Manchin.
Right.
And the dynamics are different because Manchin had everything to say in regard to how the Senate bill would go down, which is the bilateral infrastructure framework bill,
right?
The BFD bill. And he still has a lot to say about the reconciliation piece, which is a larger $3.5 trillion that contains a lot of the ambitious agenda that wasn't in the infrastructure framework.
Right.
But he's a senator, and it's the House that's going to decide what to do with this reconciliation bill right now.
Okay.
And the dynamics are different because Manchin can say whatever he wants. It's not going to influence how the House passes what they want. The reason being, the assumption on everybody's part is that not only do you need both, and we got past that 9 holdouts want more concessions from Pelosi. That's yesterday's news.
Okay.
That's even more in the past than Afghanistan. But the House will come to terms with what they want to do. Manchin then, to get it past the Senate, because only the bilateral infrastructure framework part of it has been passed by the Senate, the reconciliation piece hasn't been, and you still need 50 senators to do that.
Yes.
And Manchin's one of them. So he'll have something to say about that. But even if both sides pass something, you still have to reconcile the two bodies, the two chambers.
True.
And that's really where Manchin's leverage is, not right now. So he can say, I don't want more than $1 trillion. I think $3.5 trillion is too much. Yes, I understand the country's on fire, but what's climate change anyway? I am from a coal country.
Yeah.
Right, he can say that.
Light us on fire. That's the whole point.
And Pelosi can say, well, go take a hike. We're going to pass whatever we want. And you really don't have anything to say about it because you're a senator, and we don't like the Senate. We're going to pass our version. And they probably will. And then Manchin says, okay, well, I said what I said. You didn't listen. Now I get to cut $2.5 trillion out of it. And that might happen. And then something will pass, and then the Democrats will claim success. And how much success depends upon a lot of different things, including our cockeyed media coverage. Yes. Because if you pass incredible legislation that just hasn't passed in 20, 30, 40 years, and Crystal Liza decides that it's not enough and therefore it's a loss, not a win, that's the way they'll cover it.
Yeah.
Because who knows why? Because we just talked about the fact that the media is fundamentally broken. On the other hand, getting anything out of this divided Senate when everybody says it was impossible is the other story angle, and some people will take that one. So, that's what's going to play out in front of us, and it's just not clear. What is clear is it's not going to be as big as Bernie wants, and it's not going to be as small as Manchin wants, and nobody knows what Sinema wants. And everybody at that particular juncture has a say because it's like Joe Lieberman holding up the public option because he's one senator, but at the time when he was doing it, he had his greatest leverage and used it.
Yes. So they're looking to imitate that, but no one knows why exactly. I'm not certain anybody knew why Lieberman was doing it either, but he was.
Yeah, he was fighting socialism on behalf of the
insurance companies. I didn't even know that.
Companies.
Okay. Well, it's good to find out what the motivation was. But yeah, they have an opportunity from the Senate to try and influence the House by saying, well, why bother working on a bill that I'm going to stop? They try that all the time. And the House's response to that is, everyone will know that you're the jerk, and everyone will know it even better. I mean, it might still work. You might still do it. But everyone will know that even more clearly if we pass something really good and ambitious. And people start to say, that's a good bill, and you launch your PR offensive against it, yeah. I don't know. It might work for you in West Virginia. I know that's your calculus. I don't know who you think there is in West Virginia who's like, gosh, do I need $1 billion tax break? But, they do think that, so, or he does anyway. So let him go. So, but that's the strategy behind it. Even though you know that there's going to be a senator standing in the way, if you make the package look that much more attractive to people and they start to get used to the idea.
And so you put a price on opposition. And that's the strategy on Pelosi's side and Biden's. And Biden gets to talk to Manchin and say, look, we played ball and all this other stuff, yada, yada. So we'll see how it comes out.
Yeah.
But, again, deciding now how it's going to work in the future is ridiculous because these are all moving pieces. What is clear to me, at least, is that it's not going to be quite as large as $3.5 trillion, but I don't know, what the final is going to be, and I don't think anybody else does either.
Right.
This is a piece from Huffington Post. Democrats discuss scaling back a key caregiving initiative by half or more. A proposed expansion of services for the elderly and people with disabilities faces major budget pressure. The proposal would dramatically strengthen federal support for what are known as home and community-based service, or HCBS for short, because everything in Washington has acronyms. It's a catch-all phrase for programs that make it possible for elderly and disabled Americans to live on their own outside of institutions. In practice, it can mean everything from caregivers who help with hygiene to nonprofit organizations that help with housing and job placement. Biden and Democratic leaders have said repeatedly they want this proposal to be part of the large spending legislation.
Yeah.
But they're saying the same thing about other things, like proposals to add dental coverage to Medicare and get Medicaid to people in Republican-led states that haven't expanded. And fitting all of these ideas into one piece of legislation is proving difficult, and especially with more conservative Democrats agitating to make the package smaller and less expensive. Leaders have responded by downsizing some of the component pieces, and at the moment, the home and community proposal appears to be in line for one of the more substantial cutbacks.
Oh, right. Yes.
Right?
Well, that's just wonderful.
The sides are lining up. If you cut this, it's a betrayal.
It is.
Well, if we don't get it passed, it's an even bigger betrayal. So,
that is too.
These are the things that are going to be on the table. You're going to hear a lot of noise, and there's going to be a lot of talking, and, really nobody knows where it's going to be. So I go back to my basic bedrock principle of how to look at Congress and see where things are going to go. And I'm not very good at this. I haven't been there like other people, and I'm not a professional like other people. All I know is you always have to make sure that your options include saving face, because somebody at some point is going to back down.
Well,
if you don't get a deal. And so, keep a close eye on how you fight this battle, because you could make it worse rather than better and get nothing.
Yes, that's true. All you have to know really is how people work, and then you find out that Congress is full of people, and you'll have a pretty good idea of the basics of things, even if you don't know the particular maneuvers they'll use to do it.
Well, there's a lot of folks that still have not figured out how people work.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. Or horses.
And some of them are paid to write and describe it for newspapers, cable.
Right, true.
And that's how Chris Eliza has his job.
Yeah, for other people who don't know how that works. That is amazing. All right, well, that does seem to wrap things up rather neatly. Got it. You need to run today, or you,
I do, and so it's a Wednesday, as is often the case. Wednesdays are
one out of every 7
packed
days.
with errands, and Abby is on patrol looking for the sanitation engineer who stops by with cookies for her, and you'll hear her barking if that in fact comes up.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, well, there's some sort of ethereal soundtrack in the background for you today.
Yes.
Have you spent the whole time backing up in an electric car by any chance? Is that what's going on?
It sounds like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know. Not exactly sure what's going on, but it's been kind of interesting and fun. It'll make editing later that much more interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Coming from the other room in our home studio that we have little control over, but that won't be an everyday thing.
Yeah, that's all right. It's kind of new agey, interesting. Makes me want to, meditate. Probably use some other. Well,
we should play it for Congress and have everybody calm down, lower the temperature. Start talking to each other. It's all part of. Everybody needs to get along.
Right.
And why don't you listen to this soundtrack instead of taking your ivermectin and just calm down?
Right. take this jade egg.
Put your mask on. You know, you don't have to take your mask off to listen to the music.
Right.
You do to take your ivermectin, but you can put your mask on and just,
if you use the
mellow
drench,
out with the rest of us.
Just pour it over
and with
your
that,
head.
that's today's segment, and I'll be back tomorrow.
Okay.
And we'll see if we can,
very good.
Get new stuff to talk about, but this COVID stuff is really dominating everything.
Yeah, well, it's like 2 years of it. It can be expected to do the same. The sheep drench thing just made me have this vision of somebody like, how they pour the Gatorade bucket over the coach's head at the end of the football game.
Yeah. It's funny because ivermectin actually has been used in lotions to treat head lice.
Well, yeah, so that's a great way to take care of things. If you borrowed the wrong helmet, during the game.
Right. So, the idea that, I could use this without a doctor's prescription because, you could use it as an ointment. Okay, well, that's not the same thing as ingesting it because doses and differences and all that sort of stuff. Well, out here in real America, we just do things like that because we have our home research institute and we just figure this stuff out for ourselves.
Yeah, I saw a TikTok guy who takes the sheep drench and he wipes it on his skin, which I guess is better than injecting or ingesting it. So I don't know whether he's out there making TikTok videos and say nobody's doing the wrong thing, but even so, at the end of the day, it's like, well, that's an anti-parasitic. Good luck with that virus.
I did see yet another story of, and this one is from California, the anti-mask fellow who was instrumental in starting the Gavin Newsom recall.
Yes,
has COVID.
Yeah,
not in hospital. He's not dying like some of the others.
Yeah,
and interestingly, now we're starting to get the cases of, well, I've been vaccinated. I'm not anti-vaccine. I just want to make a choice. It should be my choice, not your choice. Because that way I can get all the angry people to vote for me. And if I say that you should get vaccinated because it's your choice, and I should get vaccinated because it's my choice, and we're all vaccinated, but you should be angry because they're not giving you a choice, then I get to be protected and still get your vote and get everybody mad.
All right, well, they have to figure out some way to get themselves vaccinated so that they live long enough to win
Fox
an election.
News has. Everybody on Fox News is vaccinated while they, tell you that it's it's filled with microchips that are going to control you.
I wonder why they like that so much. It really doesn't make any sense. But
anyway, once we figure that out, we'll just turn to Chris Cillizza and he'll explain the whole dynamics behind Fox News hosts all being vaccinated but telling their constituents it's bad news. Because, he knows people, and that's why he gets paid $1 gazillion to tell us that, it's all politics.
Where are these dollars coming from? Okay. Well,
I don't know.
Me, probably.
Nobody knows.
Accidentally.
Advertisers who advertise on CNN, I suppose.
Right. Sheep drench manufacturers.
Yep. Anyway, the recall looks like it's going all right for Newsom, but it'll be interesting. It's always going to be closer.
Yeah.
And the last politics piece is that Youngkin, who is the Republican candidate for governor in your state of Virginia,
Commonwealth,
claims to have a internal poll which shows him a point ahead of Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat.
It's not prescribed as being internal, this poll, but he's using it that way anyway.
Yeah, perhaps he has an ointment external poll. Right. I don't know. But the always interesting thing is whenever you get an internal poll, you can generally, take away 10 from the person who's pushing it because they're trying to push a narrative. Yes, and the narrative they're trying to push is, he's closing the gap because everybody hates Joe Biden. And, of course, Bret Stephens from the New York Times picked up on that and says, that's brilliant. Since Biden's presidency has collapsed, here's all the things that are going to happen.
Yeah.
And so it's just, he really wants Biden's presidency collapsed because don't forget, he's the climate change denier guy.
Yeah, and everything else.
And this new bill is exactly saying, you're full of crap and California's on fire and New York is drowning and we really need this and everything you said about climate is wrong. And so, no, just like the people who can't admit that they were taken in by the scammers on the Republican side, they have to double down and say, no, you're the fool because, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
So remember, that's a narrative that people are going to try to push, and we'll see how it all plays out. Take care, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
Very good. Okay, thanks, Greg. And we'll miss the music in the background. I'm curious about what that is. It didn't sound like he was ready to tell us either. I don't know. But at any rate, whatever. I don't know, maybe there's some yoga classes going on next door these days. It's just, it's the generator taking a yoga class. That's what it is. I don't know. Abby could be playing music. Could be anything. All right. Well, there's lots to go on with. We could read the McSweeney's article and bleep everything. I don't know how. I guess it'll be funny podcast time to bleep Greg like 5 times in 2 seconds. But I don't know. We'll see how it comes out. Of course, Gil says don't bother. And also he says, I'm not paying extra for the cursing either. But don't bother bleeping the thing. And there really is no reason in the world why we couldn't do that. And I don't know. Maybe as a special treat we won't. I don't know. But then I'll have to mark it. The thing is, when I'm posting the podcast, this is a stupid little thing. But this is what goes on afterwards. As I'm putting the podcast up, when you're putting it up on Libsyn and you're checking off the various boxes and filling in the various fields so that Libsyn can then distribute your podcast to the various, 500 different places that have, that host all sorts of, not host, but, carry all sorts of podcasts. Apple has it, and, Google has one, and YouTube, and yada, yada, all the different things. And you have to click, there's little radio buttons that you got to click yes, no to, or whatever, on is the material clean or like adult. And I don't think there's that many. I forget how it actually goes, and it doesn't matter. I'm not even going to look to show you, but it's something like that. And as I recall, there's really no in between either. But I think there's like a no rating button, clean, no rating, and adult. And it's like, the guy said F once or twice. How adult is that really? We're not talking about, it's not like a porn review or anything. I mean, but is that adult? Well, it isn't clean. And me, I'm agonizing over, do I click the clean button if it's mostly clean? Or whatever. And then I end up putting, whenever I don't bleep it or something, whatever happens, I'll click no rating. And I don't know whether that does anything. I don't know if there's anybody in the world who's looking at podcasts and goes, well, has a filter on like only clean content. And I don't even know if it counts as clean if you bleep the thing, especially, like if Greg says that goddamn mother boop or son of a beep, whatever, everybody knows what was in there. Is that clean? I think so. I think that counts as clean, but who knows? I don't know if anybody's sorting or won't download a non-clean thing or anything like that. And I don't know. Then I begin to worry. Well, what if somebody, wants to hear the news, but they only like clean stuff, and this time it's clicked no rating, and they don't know what that means, so they run away from it. And how is that happening? It's never happening. Why are you worried about these things? But you ask me a question that's supposed to be answered honestly, and it gives me, problems if I don't know how to answer, and that's the reason I obsess over those things. So how do you like that? Now you know something else about me. And it's probably not a good information to circulate. Al-Qaeda will be cursing now, and I'll be worried about these things, and they'll be trying to sneak I don't know how they'll get on the air. That will be my bigger problem, probably. Okay, let's round up some other stories. I don't know. I think we could probably take a look at the Twitter feed. Of course, there's stuff in Pocket that I want to bring to your attention, but so much has been going on this morning, and so much happening even on the front page at Daily Kos between what's on, what front pagers are providing and diarists are writing. I am somewhat interested in finding out about Jason Miller and what the F and F he's doing. I'm just going to throw F's into everything now. What the effing F he's doing in effing Brazil. Jason Miller detained in Brazil for undemocratic activities, which is, I guess, still against the law there. Good old Jason Miller. This photo, I think, is just a file photo of Jason Miller just sort of occupying the whole frame. You know what I mean? If you've had a chance to look at a picture of him. Who wrote this? This is from, you always know when you're talking about community members versus the front pagers who now all use their real names and everything. Zen Bassoon, which, probably not the real name, but, kids get weird names these days. You never know. I don't want to make fun of your name if your real name is Zen or Zen Bassoon, for that matter. I might anyway, but I didn't want to. Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and all the rest are serious about killing democracy all over the world. We begin. Zen Bassoon begins. Thanks, Zen. Can I call you Zen? The latest is in Brazil, where a January 6th style coup is planned for today. And that one, January 6th, was planned also, so they're right. As you saw last night, police were overwhelmed, and today they are trying to overthrow the Supreme Court and the Congress to make Bolsonaro dictator for life. And Trump spokesweasel Jason Miller was helping Bolsonaro, but he was just detained in Brazil for doing those undemocratic activities. And like I said, you can keep him. Don Jr., it says here, I mentioned this earlier, was supposed to be there too, but his excuse was that Ida delayed his flight. Ida, of course, now over, and I don't know what he's talking about, but I guess he just chickened out. The embedded tweets bringing us the news here, besides, I don't know what the news source was that he links to, but maybe it's, who knows. Anyway, these are coming from the Midas, is that how I assume they pronounce it that way, Midas Touch guys, MEIDAS, mostly tethered to reality, I find, but occasionally, taken in, as we all are, by something that they, a BS detector should have gone off for. But, all right, their tweet, breaking, Trump aide Jason Miller has been detained by authorities at a Brazilian airport, and is being questioned regarding anti-democratic activities while in the country, which could mean anything. In Brazil, that could mean, how can we do some anti-democratic activities here in this country, Jason? Could you tell us? But presumably they're mad about his engaging in them in their country. There's a further tweet here, further confirmation from Brazilian journalist below, so that's good. Miller was in the country speaking with far-right leaders as Brazil is bracing for a January 6th inspired insurrection/coup attempt inspired by far-right President Jair, I guess is still the pronunciation, Bolsonaro. The tweet is from Igor Gadela, Gadelha, who, is tweeting in Portuguese. So that doesn't help me very much. But, you can hit the translate button. Should we? And I mean, I don't know whether the Midas Touch guys speak Portuguese or just translated the thing. But now I'm kind of curious. Is there not a translate button on here? I think there is. There it is, translate tweet. So what does Igor say? According to, the online translator, which very often misses the nuances and certainly all the idioms and things, and maybe doesn't even get the correct meaning of each word. But let's see. Heads up. That looks like it's probably right. Atenção. I don't know. Federal police. He detained Trump's former aide at Brasilia Airport, that would be Jason Miller, this morning to take his testimony. Order departed from the minister, then their Twitter handle, of STF Oficial, full backstage in the column in the Metropole. So I guess full backstory probably and all that. And the translation's certainly not good enough for us to think about going over and trying to translate a Brazilian newspaper. But anyway, look, I hope it's correct. Let's see what else Zen Bassoon has to say about it. More Midas Touch tweets. And really, basically, I guess this is an indication that you should just go read Midas Touch's Twitter feed and get all of that news. Here's Donald Trump Jr.'s tweet of was hoping to join my friend Bolsonaro SP, I think that might be Bolsonaro Jr. actually, in Brazil, but airport closures in New Jersey due to storm remnants delayed us. That was from September 4th. It's now, of course, September 8th, and he probably could have gotten there, but golly, people are getting arrested, and he's avoiding the area. Just so you know. I'll put that in pocket so we can find it all later. Let's take a look at the rest of the Twitter feed and see if there was anything else super exciting to add to that. Oh, yeah, there's the news that Greg shared. The guy in California who was described as an early leader of the Newsom recall movement who now has COVID is Orrin Heatley, maybe? Heatlie. like, a hot lie. And, okay, but apparently he's recovering at home. Case is mild and yada yada. But there's always a chance it could turn. All right. Other big news of the morning. I am reliably informed through video being provided by Lauren Burke, tweeting all of this out in case you wanted to follow along. LV Burke. And let's see what's happening now. Because she was providing all this video. I guess she's there on the ground, maybe, of the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue from Richmond, Virginia, which is a big deal. So, good news. Glad they finally got around to that one. And a big deal for those of us here in Virginia. And I'm glad to see it on video. You might be too. Go and enjoy it. All right. Let's see. Here's one thing. I got a Washington Post article that's sort of dry and matter of fact about Governor Abbott and his eliminate all rapists nonsense. But I think we're up to speed on that one. Well, let's just share some other COVID news as well as we get prepared to exit for the top of the hour break. I'll give you at least this headline. Where the hell is it from? It's from Daily Kos. Okay, well, it's from Marissa Higgins, who wrote this headline and then covered the story. Hospitals in Republican-led state given permission to ration care among COVID-19 surge. Which I saw variously described over the weekend as people saying, aha, here's those death panels that the Republicans were either so frightened of or were fully intent on implementing from the very beginning, depending on how much projection you believe they usually engage in. But that's the story, yes. And why don't I read you a paragraph or two as we exit to the music. Since the nation first began responding to the novel coronavirus, we've known that some states have handled the public health crisis with much more diligence than others. Idaho, for example, has continued to trail behind other states when it comes to face masks and has some of the lowest vaccination rates in the country. This despite Jones' best efforts. And on Tuesday, public health leaders in the state announced they enacted a crisis standards of care plan, which, well, rations care. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's find out exactly what we're talking about up there in Idaho. I skipped over the end of the first paragraph, but, no disrespect here for Marissa, but I think the meat of the article begins in that second paragraph, that on Tuesday, public health leaders in the state announced that they enacted the Crisis Standards of Care Plan, which in simple terms allows 10 hospitals and healthcare systems in the northern and central parts of Idaho to ration healthcare, as reported by the Associated Press. Why? Well, because they assigned somebody at the Associated Press to cover it. What kind of question is that? Oh, I see. Why implement the Standards of Care Plan? Yes. Better question. That's what Marissa was after. Because there are more COVID-19 patients than they can otherwise handle. Duh, of course. That's why. This is a similar move to what's happening in Hawaii, where Governor David, we did this once. Ige, is that how he pronounces the name? Gosh, I don't know. IGE. And we looked it up and everything, and the luxury of doing these shows pre-taped. The one I aired yesterday, I actually went and looked up a pronunciation and came back and got it right as a result. Well, anyway, he recently signed an order that would release healthcare workers and hospitals from liability if they do have to ration healthcare. Relatedly, she adds parenthetically, vacationers really need to stop traveling to Hawaii for now. Oh. Damn. Well, I didn't have any plans to do that, but I do keep seeing, particularly every once in a while, I see particularly native Hawaiians who I think probably have largely felt that way regardless of COVID for a long time. But yeah, they had a pretty good thing going in Hawaii where they were out on an island in the middle of the ocean, and it was very difficult to just walk in there and say, here's some COVID. But now you can fly in there and say, here's some COVID. And for a while, it wasn't even happening because everyone was staying home, and now they're not doing it anymore. In part, of the public announcement on Tuesday, the Ohio Department of Health and Welfare essentially warned state residents that they might not get the kind of care they're used to if they do need to be hospitalized. What might the difference look like? Luckily, patients would still receive care, at least to some degree. They might, however, be placed in a conference room rather than in a traditional bed. They might also have to go without some seriously important medical equipment. Okay. Healthcare workers might have their duties changed or extended. The point? So hospitals can use their intensive care unit rooms for patients they think are most likely to survive. The overall goal, of course, is to save as many lives as possible and to offer care to as many people as they can. Idaho's guidelines essentially rate patients based on factors that contribute to their likelihood of surviving the current healthcare crisis. People who are both in great need of care and are likely to actually survive and benefit from it are then listed as priority folks for in-demand resources like certain medical equipment or an ICU bed. If you're a patient without a life-threatening condition, you may simply experience a delay in your treatment. If you're in severe need but your chances of survival are low, you may be given care that allows you to be pain-free in order to keep you comfortable while you either recover or don't. Remember, it didn't have to be this way. And remember what they used to say in order to make it not that way. Remember, we don't talk about flatten the curve anymore, but that's, I don't know. For some reason, that seems to be out the window for whatever reason, but not only because people weren't complying with the request to try and flatten the curve. Maybe they never understood it, but they got tired of it and it's gone by the wayside. This designation, the new protocols in Idaho, will be in effect until there are enough resources for regular levels of care and treatment to return, which might involve, for example, a drop in the number of patients or an increase in staffing or an increase in beds and equipment. Could go either way. Crisis standards of care is a last resort, Department Director Dave Jeppesen stressed in Tuesday's statement. It means we have exhausted our resources to the point that our healthcare systems are unable to provide the treatment and care we expect. Jeppesen stressed that this was a decision he had been hoping to avoid and that the best tools they have at this point are for people to both get vaccinated and wear masks while in crowds, both inside and outside. But so much for that. Less than 40% of folks in Idaho are fully vaccinated, and almost 45% have received their first dose of the vaccine. According to the Mayo Clinic, the average positive test rate for Idaho residents reached over 20% at the end of August, with cases steadily increasing since July. The takeaway, as always, wear a face mask wherever possible, get vaccinated if you're eligible, and be kind and considerate to those around you, and especially the most vulnerable. So, well, we'll see whether anybody wants to do any of those things. Yeah, I mean, the worst thing that could have happened with this pandemic was it being so slow rolling. I mean, considering how fast it can spread, you know, it's hard to imagine describing the thing as slow spreading and slow rolling, but we have 330 million people in the country, and they're kind of spread out. And it was certainly reasonable to think that in the more remote areas or where the population density was much lower, it wasn't going to spread as much. But the virus needs only time and a little bit of help from you by not doing anything to prevent its spread if it manages to find your community, because you think, well, it hasn't found my community for 17 months. What are the odds it'll find my community in the 18th? And I don't know if the odds are necessarily good or bad, but why risk it? But I don't know. That's what people do. They don't have a really good sense of the odds in these things. Anyway, but yeah, speaking of giving things time, as always, I'm keeping an eye on the COVID numbers and which states and which countries are creeping up in the stats. Over the weekend, we did pass this gruesome milestone. The figure as it's expressed over on Worldometers is the number of deaths per 1 million residents, right? That's the way they normalize things over various countries of various sizes. And the United States over the weekend passed 2,000 deaths per million residents. And Let's see. Well, the way to put that in perspective is, well, for some people it would be to convert it to a percentage. What percentage of the American population has been killed by COVID, officially speaking? And that's not usually the route people go, because when you tell people, well, 0.2% of the population is what that means, and people say, oh, that's nothing. It's not even, that's 0.2, 1/5 of 1%. That's, that's pocket change. That's a rounding error to some people. Of course, it's 667,000 people in the United States. And sometimes when you put things that way and say, well, 667,000, we're talking about now 2/3 of a million people that have been killed. And others are catching on to the reality that that's more people killed by COVID in the last 18 months in the United States than the United States Armed Forces has lost in combat forever, since, Lexington and Concord, 1775. Oh, yeah, well, that's actually quite a substantial number. Or, we're getting close to more people died of COVID in the last 18 months to 2 years. We'll probably be around 2 years when we hit this mark. Then were killed from all, from combat and other, and medical losses, et cetera, in the entirety of the Civil War, North and South. Okay, and that was spread out over 4 years. That's also bad news. Another way of putting it, though, just turning the percentage inside out and upside down. If 0.2% isn't very interesting to you, then you can put it this way. 1 in every 500 people, 1 in every 500 residents of the United States of America has died from COVID. That's actually quite striking. Of every 500 people, one of them's gone. Just gone. And I was wondering when we would start to talk about this, because, of course, I also spent most of the weekend reading the economic punditry over the weekend of the conventional wisdom anyway. It's like no one wants to work anymore. Employers are having so much trouble finding people to fill these jobs or to stay in these jobs, particularly low-wage, low-paying jobs that are particularly risky in the COVID era as well. And they're marveling at it and theorizing things like, well, it's all the damn welfare, all those extended unemployment benefits that we gave to people so that they could survive staying home instead of working, because staying home was the way you would live in the middle of a pandemic. And we can't have that anymore. They need to get back out to work. We need to make it economically unfeasible to stay home so that people will come back and work at my business. And well, when you hold that up to, 1 out of every 500 people in the country died already from this stuff. And by the way, there's a lot of people in this country, to be sure. But for the most part, the people dying, not the hedge funders, right? Not your investment bankers, not even your lawyers, not even your piano tuners, probably, quite honestly, because they just could afford to hopefully stay home and do that and not work. It was the people who are in the jobs that they mysteriously can't fill. I don't know what happened. I have a meatpacking plant and 200 of my workers died. I don't know why I can't get people to come here for minimum wage. I got 50 cents right here to the next person who signs up to take the job of the guy who died in the job conditions I'm asking you to work in. Why doesn't anyone want this money? And on top of all that, the other thing employers are saying is not only is it difficult to find new people, but they are scrambling like mad to hold on to the people that they've got. If you have a good employee, you don't want to let them go. And that's a good thing. Maybe they're raising wages and benefits for people in that situation, but I'm not positive that they are. I hope so. But yeah, and not only are there not that many people interested in taking the jobs of the people who died on the job in front of them, but those who are working are probably not shopping around either. People are making an effort to keep them where they are. I don't know. I found that kind of interesting, and the fact that nobody seems to be talking about that is kind of astonishing. And the number like I said, it went past 2,000, and it's been creeping up, even over the weekend. It adds up. It's not tops in the world by any means. We're not far from the top of the charts in deaths. I think we're probably about, 15th, 16th in the country, in the world. So you won't see the United States at the moment on that list when I publish it as a top 10 list. It's still far and away, like, for instance, Peru, which is at something like one in every, what are they at? About one every 200 and something people. Let's see, their death rate is, so they're past 0.5% of their country. 5,925 deaths per million. So, yeah, it's pretty extreme out there. And, well, they're far and away in the lead. But if you want to be brought up to speed, let's see. The United States, I won't read you the whole list, but the United States falls, we actually dropped a little bit to 20th in the world. But, as I said, nothing to be super happy about, as we are one of only 22 countries in the entire world with a death rate already higher than 2,000 people per million. There aren't that many. Only 3 countries in the world have exceeded 3,000 per million, and we're in that band of 2,000. So let's see. Those countries, by the way, Hungary and Bosnia and Herzegovina are in the 3,000 per range. And just that, 3,056 in Bosnia and Herzegovina, 3,123 per million in Hungary, which, Orban doing a great job. Peru, and I don't know what happened in Peru, and it might be just that Peru is the only one doing honest reporting. I don't know. 5,925 deaths per million population. Pretty incredible. So, that happened over the weekend, and I'm not certain whether any economists are taking stock of that and considering it. But I think perhaps it's getting to that point where they ought to, and people have been wondering aloud, will it affect elections in this country that, it seems like there's a partisan bias, very hard partisan bias, that people who are holding out against the vaccine and eschewing mask wearing, can you kill enough Republicans to make a serious dent in things electorally? I don't think so, but I'm willing to try. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, I'm not supposed to say that, and I've been trying to promise myself that I won't do it anymore, but I mean, I think it's just a harsh reality of what's out there. Okay. Well, in other COVID news, I'll do one more COVID bit here. New York Times had 2 things, one just before the weekend and one over the weekend. Over the weekend, the encouraging news out of the New York Times was the 1 in 5,000 article. Perhaps you saw that one. David Leonhardt writing this piece. The good news, again, being that's the 1 in 5,000 is the real chances of a breakthrough infection. So that was kind of encouraging. CDC reported a terrifying fact in July. Vaccinated people with the Delta variant of the COVID virus carried roughly the same viral load in their noses and throats as unvaccinated people. And that got everybody very worried. And then we started to see the spike, and we thought, it must be that, Delta is unmoved by the vaccine in terms of actually infecting people. It's just that the vaccine makes the infection that much milder and survivable, which is a good thing. But I think maybe the word is that we might have been fretting about that a little too much, over worried about it. The news seemed to suggest that even the vaccinated were highly vulnerable to getting infected and passing the virus to others. Sure enough, stories about vaccinated people getting COVID, so-called breakthrough infections, were all around this summer at a party in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Among the Chicago Cubs on Capitol Hill, Delta seemed as if it might be changing everything. But in recent weeks, More data has become available, and it suggests the true percentage is less alarming. Yes, Delta has increased the chances of getting COVID for almost everyone, but if you're vaccinated, a COVID infection is still uncommon, and those high viral loads are not as worrisome as they initially sounded. How small are the chances of the average vaccinated American contracting COVID? Probably, just like the headline said, about 1 in 5,000 per day. And, each day brings another chance to be one of those 1 in 5,000. But even lower for people who take precautions or live in a highly vaccinated community. And that's what we're counting on around here. The article does go on at some length, but you've probably read that. That's the sort of article that was highly circulated and everybody was interested in. The one I wanted to get to, we'll jump into now. Also from the New York Times, it's Sarah Cliff, who has a healthcare beat and always has. COVID medical bills are about to get bigger as some insurers focus on encouraging vaccination. Temporary waivers that kept patient costs low are expiring. What's up here? And will it affect you or me, more importantly? Americans will most likely pay significantly more for COVID medical care during this new wave of cases, whether that's a routine coronavirus test or a lengthy hospitalization. Earlier in the pandemic, most major health insurers voluntarily waived costs associated with the COVID treatment. Patients didn't have to pay their normal co-payments or deductibles for emergency room visits or hospital stays. Most COVID tests were free, too. The landscape has since changed as the pandemic persists into a second year. Federal law still requires insurers to cover testing at no cost to the patient when there is a medical reason for seeking care, such as exposure to the disease or a display of symptoms. But more of the tests sought now don't meet the definition of medical reason and are instead for monitoring. And insurers are now treating COVID more like any other disease, no longer fully covering the costs of care. Some businesses, like Delta Airlines, are planning to charge unvaccinated employees higher rates for insurance, citing in part the high hospitalization costs for COVID cases. Insurers are confronting the question of whether the costs of COVID treatment should fall on everyone or just the individuals who have chosen not to get a vaccine, said Cynthia Cox, a vice president at the Kaiser Family Foundation, who has researched how insurers are covering COVID treatment. A lot of us have been sort of hoping for that. We'll just find out whether it's actually a bad idea or not. The federal rules that make coronavirus testing free include exemptions for routine workplace and school testing, which has become more common as students head back to the classroom, and as companies mandate regular testing for unvaccinated workers. Side note, I saw news earlier, yesterday, I think, that the Los Angeles school system was going to be implementing regular testing, monitoring of everybody vaccinated or not in the school system. So one of the largest school systems in the country moving to that. Sounds like a good idea. Probably means other school systems could do it too. Maybe not everyone, but something to think about. Because insurers are not required to cover that regular testing, right? Some patients have already received testing bills as high as $200 for routine screenings, according to documents that patients have submitted to a New York Times project tracking the costs of COVID testing and treatment. If you've received a bill, you can submit it here, and it's linked, and I won't bother reading you the URL, but believe me, it's totally real. Some of the highest bills, however, will probably involve COVID patients who need extensive hospital care, now that most insurers no longer fully cover those bills. 72% of large health plans are no longer making COVID treatment free for patients, a recent study from the Kaiser Family Foundation found, and you probably found it from a recent study of GoFundMe, where everybody who was holding out against the vaccine and saying you shouldn't get it and the whole thing was a hoax is now getting it and going to the hospital and asking for the community to step up and pay for their care, because they hate socialism so much. Anyway, this includes Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida, the largest health plan in a state experiencing one of the country's worst outbreaks. How did that happen? On Wednesday, Florida Blue began requiring patients to pay their normal deductibles and co-payments for COVID treatment. Tony Woods, a spokeswoman, said the plan was now focused on encouraging vaccinations. When the COVID-19 pandemic began last year, we implemented several emergency provisions to temporarily help our members, she said in a statement. Medical diagnostic testing for COVID-19 as well as vaccinations continue to be available to members at $0 cost share. Oscar Health, which sells coverage in Florida and 14 other states, also ended free COVID treatment this week. It cited widespread availability of the vaccine as a key reason. It's also run by Oscar the Grouch, and that's the reason for not wanting to help people. We started waiving cost sharing for COVID-19 treatments at the peak of the pandemic in 2020, when there were few options available for those who fell ill with the virus, said Jackie Kahn, an Oscar spokeswoman. We believe that the COVID vaccine is our best way to beat this pandemic, and we are committed to covering it and testing at $0 for our members. The new policies generally apply to all patients, including the vaccinated, people who get sick with a breakthrough infection, and children under 12 who are not yet eligible for the vaccine. If you have a small kid who gets COVID at school and ends up at the ICU, that family is now going to be stuck with the bill even though that patient did not have the ability to get vaccinated, said Dr. Kao-Ping Chua, a pediatrician at the University of Michigan who researches COVID care costs. The average COVID hospitalization costs approximately $40,000, researchers have found. A lengthy hospital stay, one that requires time in the intensive care unit or transfer by air ambulance, for rural Americans, let's say, that can cost many multiples more. Most insured patients won't pay that entire bill. They'll face whatever share they owe through deductibles and co-payments. Dr. Chua and his colleagues published research this summer finding that among patients who had to pay a share of their COVID hospitalization, the average costs were $3,800. There were some patients where it was $10,000 and others where it was $500. He said, it gives you some semblance of what things will look like now without waivers. Surprise bills for routine COVID testing could be smaller but more common as schools and workplaces increasingly rely on regular screening to prevent coronavirus from spreading. At many workplaces, unvaccinated workers must submit to monitoring at least weekly. Some employers, including the federal government, plan to fully cover the costs of those tests, but others, including some hotels and universities, will ask unvaccinated workers to bear some or all of the testing costs. Rebecca Riley recently received a $200 bill from a laboratory with an unfamiliar name. When she called to inquire about the charge, she learned it was a fee for a COVID test. Her son, a high school student, is regularly tested at his Los Angeles area high school. See? I didn't expect to get any bills, she said. I feel stupid, but I'd heard the tests were free. Well, they used to be. Ms. Riley contacted her insurer about the charge, and it agreed to pay the full amount. But she now worries about future surprise testing bills. I really feel for the families that won't be able to pay, she said. And she's right. But what can you do? I don't know. Wear your masks. Get vaccinated. I did happen to see something this morning, speaking of masks and vaccinations. A good call here. Whose comment is this? Ben Hunt. Who is Ben Hunt? I don't know. I don't follow Ben Hunt, but let's take a look. Yeah, his profile doesn't tell us too much. But he's a blue check sort of fellow, and he advertises EpsilonTheory.com as his link or website of choice to send you to, and he has some 116,000 followers for, I guess, good comments like this one. A grab from the coverage by the Murfreesboro Holler, the newspaper or news source from down in Tennessee, and adds to the Our Stupid Discourse some video of a student in Rutherford County, Tennessee, telling the board, school board, yes, the Board of Education, that his grandmother, a former teacher in Rutherford County schools, died of COVID because someone wasn't wearing a mask. And the anti-maskers behind him, holding their signs, are laughing and interrupting him while he's trying to speak. And Ben Hunt is commenting, look, there's a lot of images I'll remember from this era, but Karen holding a "Let Our Kids Smile" sign while laughing at a kid talking about his dead grandmother is pretty close to the top of that list. And I'll say, damn, like, what the hell? I don't understand how people can do this really. But, you know, I guess I'm doing the same thing and laughing at people taking horse paste and everything. But I don't know. I feel like there's a qualitative difference between what I'm doing and what they're doing. But what a nice person. Somebody claims to have identified this woman as a nurse working for Cigna Healthcare. That would be bad news. Anyway, we'll be right back with more equally bad news.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Comment here from Darwin, our friend Darwin Darko, who says, well, basically, that I think it's a great idea as a deterrent, this Idaho plan. Interesting. Well, this comment, interesting too. Much like, he says, much like the Texas abortion law, which I think is a paper tiger, you will scare people into compliance. I get the point there. I'm not so sure that, well, you know, I think I understand the point of it there is that I think a lot of the lawsuits in the end won't, or, well, by rights shouldn't hold up. And I don't think that any of the bounty hunters are likely to end up getting their money, although there will certainly be crazy Texas judges who try to give it to them. And in the meantime, it will deter people from seeking abortions in Texas because they're afraid of the long-term costs involved in even in fighting and winning against such a lawsuit, if they in fact win. But I guess that I get that point, although a sensitive thing at this point, certainly. We still don't know how this is going to shake out. But as he's saying here, if I don't, basically, well, we have to edit the comment a little bit, but that's okay. You can see it on Twitter, but basically saying if I don't get vaxxed, I can't use the ER as my fallback plan, whether for COVID or anything else, right? If people who are uninsured and don't believe in the necessity of becoming insured, who might use the emergency room every time they have any kind of illness because they don't have a primary care doctor. And now that's taken away because, you know, you'll be turned away for most routine care because of the crush on the hospitals from COVID and everything else, some of which is associated with COVID and some of which isn't. So that's an interesting point, too, reminding people that you just can't continue to rely on your local hospital to take care of everything for you. Let's see. Other stories. Oh, yes. You know, I mentioned earlier, I got a couple of things to turn to here, but I mentioned earlier dang it, why does this always happen? A lack of attention to stories that might provide at least a partial explanation, or stories that might be partly explained by the fact that 1 in every 500 residents of America has died from COVID. And I guess I want to alert you to this. I hear an awful lot about this stuff at home, or rather at Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, because, as you know, our lovely production assistant, who is here less frequently these days, being back in the office 2 days a week, but very often still working here, and who works in operations and supply chain and logistics issues, fall under her purview at her company. And I've been hearing about the coming supply chain nightmare for quite some time. And hearing the explanations about it, for it, are fascinating. And I'm reminded of it by a thread I grabbed, I don't know, I guess it must have been Saturday, while we were out partaking of various parts of the supply chain. And I saw this very interesting tweet from Dr. Elizabeth Sawin, S-A-W-I-N, Sawin, I'm going to say, and it's probably wrong. And she identifies as co-founder and co-director of Climate Interact. That's her outfit's Twitter handle, Climate Interact. Multi-solving for people and climate, she says helpfully for us, and saying the interesting part of what she had to say was, my new hobby, and she encloses that in quotes, my new hobby is watching supply chains do weird stuff. It's not been my hobby, but it just happens, a lot in the background as I've been hearing about all the various shortages that are going to shake out in weird ways to start affecting, normal everyday consumers who don't pay attention to this stuff. But here's the doctor's take on this stuff. I've been watching supply chains do weird stuff. I don't think most of us are fully seeing what's happening yet, and I think many are dismissing things that we do see as one-offs in a weird year, rather than looking for the patterns underneath. Like, she says, I assume she's talking about her husband. It says, husband comes home from the grocery shopping. Quote, the juice aisle had all these gaps on the shelves. Never seen that before. And I just think, Of course, we did see that last year. The gaps were on the toilet paper parts of the shelves. But there were lots of things, and people did a lot of panic buying. So is it something like that, or is it something different? Well, as it turns out, I think it's something different. But more examples, like we asked our mechanic to look out for a certain used car that we're in the market for, and he said, we aren't buying or selling used cars right now because they're so expensive because of the supply, or rather because the supply of new cars is so low because of that chip thing. What's the chip thing? Well, it turns out the chips that are on the onboard computers in most new cars that are in low supply, they're in low supply because the raw materials to make the chips are also in low supply, plus labor shortages, et cetera, et cetera. But that's all beyond what's going on in this part of the thread right now. Like when the old car we're nursing along needed a repair, it sat at the mechanic for a month because they couldn't get the needed part. Like my parents get milk delivered from a consortium of local farms. Cool service. This week, they only got part of what they ordered and a note about supply constraints. Now, she says, I know enough about milk in the Northeast to guess it's not likely an actual milk constraint. Maybe there's a lot of new subscribers to the service, which would be a good thing. And they need to match that with signing on new producers, new milk producers, in order to provide everybody with that. Or she says, my observant parents, who are in their 80s with memories of the World War II years, they're betting on constraints to the supply of plastic jugs. Yeah, the stuff you put the milk in. They report that last week, the jugs that they got for their milk, the jugs were different, and now there's a supply constraint note. I don't know where those jugs are made. China? Louisiana? Who knows, right? Either one could be, and they would have two different reasons for having a lack of adequate supply. I don't know how big the backlog of jugs is. It seems soon to feel Ida impacts, or rather, it seems too soon to feel Ida impacts, like what she was saying, maybe the drugs are made in Louisiana and they're closed because of Ida. And Saturday might have been too soon. But I can imagine a China supply chain disruption after articles like this one from Supply Chain Brain. An article, I guess I'll have to click on it to get the full headline here. The global supply chain crisis, oh, get out of here, pop-up, as told by one stuck box of fertilizer. And it actually probably would be a very interesting read. We'll read it after this thread because it'll get at some of the stuff I've been hearing about from my supply chain expert here at headquarters. But she goes on to say, the doctor does, obviously I'm just guessing and wondering aloud. My main point is to urge you, if you aren't already, to start noticing, observing, and trying to see the trends beneath the noise and drivers beneath the trends. So, milk, juice, car repairs. These are small, little disruptions. We figure out our way around them, and at least for a middle-class family like mine, we are buffered by full pantries and a second vehicle, etc., etc. But what I wish there was more attention to is how, if at all, these patterns fit into the critical work of these decades. How do we understand and work with them to prevent dangerous slowdowns to densification, energy retrofits, clean tech build-outs, infrastructure hardening, and disaster recovery and rebuilding? Right? Imagine when we find out that, yes, it's time to, rebuild down in Louisiana, time to rebuild and strengthen infrastructure in the hard-hit Northeast, which is still suffering from the after effects of Ida, and find out the concrete for this stuff is on back order. We can't get it to you until, for the next 3 months, at which point it will arrive in midwinter and you won't really be able to do your construction anyway. Increasing a clean domestic manufacturing capacity is highlighted in the Green New Deal resolution from 2018, and along with jobs it will create, resilience to supply chain disruptions seems like it is a second really important benefit. Of course, supply chain disruptions could have implications for building a domestic manufacturing capacity. It's almost like a complex system out there. Anyway, as she says at the end, if you're interested in complex systems and tumultuous times, you can follow some of the work we do at Multi-Solving Learning, from people working across silos to green cities, insulate homes, scale clean energy, build community, restore land, all with an eye on equity and justice. All good stuff, but all easily disrupted by these supply chain problems. I'm wondering if this piece in Supply Chain Brain, which actually comes from Bloomberg, an August 31st piece, might get closer to what I've been hearing at home. But if not, I'll add commentary along the way. Again, the title of the piece is The Global Supply Chain Crisis as Told by One Stuck Box of Fertilizer. Somewhere in the world's busiest port of Shanghai, a container of fertilizer sits among tens of thousands of boxes, waiting for a ride to the U.S. It's been on the dock for months, trapped by typhoons and COVID outbreaks that have worsened major congestion to the global supply chain network. While the fertilizer has been stranded there since May, the port is just one stop on the long journey from central China to the U.S. Midwest. Delays have stretched a delivery that ordinarily would take weeks to more than half a year. And that time frame will keep expanding as the goods have barely started the roughly 15,000 kilometer or 9,300 mile trek. This is the tale of one humble shipment and its arduous journey across the world. While some of the barriers keeping it from its final destination may be specific to this particular case, the journey is emblematic of the inertia that has gripped global trade during the pandemic. From the U.S. to Sudan to China, container boxes, this is what I keep hearing about, container boxes have been lying at ports, rail yards, and in warehouses as the pandemic rages on. In an industry with 25 million containers and some 6,000 ships hauling them, it's easy to see disruptions as one big headache confined to the shipping world. But each container that's delayed is economic activity that's restrained, heaping costs one box at a time on consumers and making it more challenging to put corn on consumers' tables or deliver presents for the holidays. It's not making it entirely clear here the way I've been hearing about it at home, but you know that the bulk of the world's cargo these days moves in these container ships, and of course each of these containers that go on the container ships. And if you're a manufacturer and I've made all the fertilizer people have been asking for. I want to send it to the United States so that you can put it on your crops and grow the crops that you're committed to delivering to, whatever, blah, 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 the supply chain that brings it to the supermarket. There's no shortage of seeds to grow your stuff. There's no shortage, hopefully, where you are, of water to water the stuff. But the fertilizer that I usually use in order to help grow the stuff, that I can't get. Why not? Well, is it a fertilizer shortage? No. So then what's the problem? And the problem is it shipping? We're out of ships? No. You got very often the manufacturer sitting there with boxes and boxes of the stuff ready to ship and no containers to put it in so that you can put it on the container ship to go over to the United States. I need a shipping container. There aren't any. Why aren't there any? Various explanations for it, but a lot of stuff that got shipped to one port or another, they don't like, it's not like you ship something from China to the United States in a container and it goes on one of these container ships, and if the container ship doesn't get stuck in the Suez Canal, it makes it all the way to the United States, and there's a lot of things going on there. But if everything goes smoothly, you take the container off the ship, put it on a truck, the truck takes it to, wherever the hell it's going, Walmart, local feed store, whatever. Sometimes they got the whole shipping container there, and you drop the thing off and they sell it out immediately. All the people come and pick up the fertilizer they want. Now the shipping container is there. Now ordinarily the truck comes by, picks up the shipping container, takes it back to the the central depot, and then it gets filled with something else and then trucked back to the shipyard, loaded onto another ship, sent back to China, sent elsewhere, whatever. These containers keep moving. The problem is that a lot of these containers got dropped in places where it was never really super economical to pick up an empty container. And it's never really all that profitable to pick up. It's a loss to pick up an empty container and move it. So they try to fill it on the way back. And that's what makes it economical to move it. But then there were various shortage of other things. A shortage of something else that usually fills the container on its way back to China causes containers not to be picked up and put back on boats and not end up back in China, where manufacturers have goods sitting on docks waiting to be, and on their loading docks of their factories waiting to be loaded into shipping containers that don't show up. That's as dumb as it is. That's what can do it. And it'll have nothing to do with I don't have enough supply, I don't have enough workers, too much welfare for the workers, nothing like that. Just the containers, where are they? There's a lack of truck drivers to pick these things up and move them. I don't know if they'll get to this in this story too, but I keep hearing about the Port of Los Angeles being an offshore parking lot. Not enough truck drivers hauling those containers that do make it here out of the dockyards to make space for more containers to come off of more ships. So ships that make it into port will sit there for weeks waiting to get all of their containers offloaded as they wait for trucks to show up to haul the damn things out of there. But if they sit in port for weeks trying to get unloaded, something that should happen in a day, what happens to the other ships also full of shipping containers that don't have spaces in the port? They end up anchoring offshore in a giant parking lot off of the port, off of the California coast, waiting weeks, sometimes months, for a berth to open up where they can go to sit to wait for weeks to get their containers offloaded. And so meanwhile, even if there aren't empty containers sitting somewhere waiting to be picked up until it's economically viable to move them again, in the meantime, thousands and thousands and thousands of these shipping containers are sitting filled on ships waiting to get space in a port to get offloaded, waiting for trucks to come and pick up the stuff. But there's no room on the dock to put more shipping containers. They've been stacked as high as they can go, waiting for the trucks to show up. It's crazy. It's crazy out there, I'm telling you. So back to the article, right? So we had just read from the U.S. to Sudan to China, container boxes have been lying in ports, blah, 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 blah. And it's becoming, it ends up getting passed on to consumers, one box of whatever goods it is that they're buying at a time, making it more challenging to put corn on consumers' tables or deliver presents for the holidays. It's also a lesson in the ripple effects across global supply chains, showing the limits of diversification as all networks are still closely connected with China. All roads lead back to China, and that has a major effect across the entire supply chain, said Dawn Tiura, head of U.S.-based Sourcing Industry Group. Congestion at one port or factory, Los Angeles, has far-reaching implications for neighboring facilities, which trickles out across the world. And then divided up into sections of our supply chain here. First, the factory. The journey for our particular box of sandy-looking ammonium phosphate, remember the fertilizer, began in February. That's when, deep in the agricultural heartland of the U.S. Midwest, a supplier for farmers in Illinois placed an order for 8 container boxes filled with fertilizer from factories in central China. Before the pandemic, a batch like this would typically arrive in Chicago in April, just in time for growers to use during planting season, said Steve Kranig, director of logistics at MX, like import-export, MX Global Inc., which is in charge of coordinating transport for the fertilizer cargo. But by May, some of the fertilizer was still sitting in Chongqing, 2,400 kilometers west of Shanghai, where it was manufactured. The culprit? A shortage of empty containers for transport. The crucial return of these steel boxes from trips to the U.S. and Europe has been delayed by everything from understaffing to lack of trucking equipment to move goods out of ports. Ta-da! The Chinese inland city, surrounded by mountains, is especially hard to reach by sea, reducing the chances of getting one. It took Kranig months to secure boxes and spots on several ships that would leave from Shanghai. The fertilizer was loaded into the containers, and they were driven to barge vessels on the Yangtze River. Now over on the river, the trip down China's busiest inland waterway took 8 days. This container was lucky as it was shipped ahead of typhoon season. Others recently haven't been so fortunate. Traffic on the Yangtze, which saw a record 2.93 billion tons of cargo pass through in 2019, has been battered as waves of extreme weather swept across China this summer. How's that happening? Authorities have had to close the river during storms, creating severe backlogs at Chinese ports as ships wait for passage to resume. While the shipment avoided any flooding disasters, it couldn't escape high transit costs, as freight rates have skyrocketed on international routes as well as along the Yangtze. In addition to high demand for goods as China's economy rebounds, the scarcity of vessels is pushing prices higher. Shipping lines are pulling smaller coastal vessels away to use on long-haul routes like the lucrative Trans-Pacific from China to the U.S. There's already a limited amount of containers that run the Yangtze River lane, and some companies are paying top dollar to take any available containers so they don't have to try to move their stuff to Shanghai via non-water routes, said Kranig. The container finally arrived in Shanghai on May 27th, and a truck delivered it to the world's busiest port. What happened at the port? Kranig isn't sure why the container is still stuck in Shanghai when 7 other boxes of the shipment found their way to Chicago, but he suspects the chaos that hit Chinese ports is a major factor. The pandemic has thrown shipping into upheaval over the past year and a half, with China becoming a major choke point. Yantian Port in Shenzhen was closed in May because of a COVID outbreak, creating congestion for the entire eastern coast, which in turn caused ripple effects across the global supply chain. Earlier this month, shipping also had to be redirected away from Ningbo, the world's 3rd busiest container port, after one employee tested positive for COVID. Typhoons and extreme weather have made matters worse. In July, the stranded container withstood Typhoon In-fa, shutting Shanghai and other nearby ports for about 4 days. And by the way, if you're wondering, you're probably seeing this already. Well, you know, what was the problem with that gigantic ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal? And ships are getting bigger and bigger, and this one was carrying, you know, I guess apparently just too much. And I don't know whether it was drafting too much because of the overload or what. And, you know, there was some steering mishaps, etc. But, I mean, it was so overloaded, it appeared, that something like that was possibly inevitable. They're overloaded because they're just trying to carry as much of that crap out of these ports and get stuff moving again as they can. They didn't think it through. Anyway, delays could reach an all-time high in the weeks ahead if the trend persists, says Glenn Kopke, a senior vice president at Four Kites Incorporated, a supply chain information provider. For now, the unlucky box of fertilizer remains stranded among the stacks at the port, buried like the crate in the final scene of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. Now, what's happening in the Pacific and beyond? Once the fertilizer finally hitches a ride to the U.S., the risks aren't over. The Pacific can be a treacherous crossing for ship captains racing to meet deadlines, and when the cargo safely arrives on the North American coast, more headaches await. The biggest U.S. trade gateway with Asia has been clogged with the most inbound container vessels in more than 6 months. Earlier this month, 35 ships were anchored awaiting berth space outside the twin ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, California. Because of the backup, many ships are being diverted to Vancouver. Next comes the inland journey. It could take another 1 to 3 months for the container to get from a West Coast port to Chicago by rail or truck. Another trip is our last section here before we wind things up for the day. The case of the stranded container seems like the worst nightmare for anyone involved in global trade. But Kranig is back for another round of orders. 8 more containers to get from China to the U.S. The pattern of delays is repeating. Again, there were no empty boxes in Chongqing, so Kranig decided to skip the river route. He loaded the fertilizer in loose, sandy form in open trucks that were driven to a warehouse in Shanghai. The cargo was then packed into containers, with some brought to Ningbo this month. Then came news that a part of Ningbo port was shut because of a worker infected with coronavirus. It's an uphill battle, said Kranig, and that brings us actually to the end of the article. But you can see how many different choke points there are for how many different products moving from one place to another. And then just the stupid problem of it's not a shortage of product, it's a shortage of boxes to put the boxes of the product in order to get them onto a ship. And then a shortage of places to put the damn ships so that you can offload all the boxes. You see what we're getting at. It's becoming a problem. So I don't know. I thought I would bring that to your attention. The way it seems to be shaking out is, right, all the dumb little stuff. I don't know if it's possible necessarily to predict things ahead of time, exactly how they'll shake out. But, yeah, if it's stuff as dumb as, you know, plastic jugs coming from somewhere, or maybe the raw materials for the plastic to make the jugs, and they're not arriving at the jug-making plant, well, you know, that could be a shortage of almost anything. It translates into a shortage of milk for these people who are getting milk delivery, not even from the stores. But, you know, will there be less jugs of milk on the shelves, of iced tea, of lemonade, of orange juice, of everything that goes in these things? And people will go to the stores and they'll say, there must be a shortage of juice or a shortage of milk. It's not that, it's the plastic. And it's not that they have a shortage of the plastic, it's that they have a shortage of the containers that bring the stuff that you need to make plastic from one place to another. And it's very difficult. Once you find out that that's the case, hard to predict. But basically, I guess it means anything that you buy now in a plastic jug could become in short supply at any given moment, or the price could go up, or it could be repackaged into a different thing that may or may not be more environmentally friendly. It might be a giant leap backwards for recyclability or something like that. I don't know. We'll have to see. It might be the smallest of our problems. But yeah, we're going to end up finding ourselves back in shortage territory. Probably all anticipated that at the outset of the COVID outbreak, thinking that worker shortages would be the problem. People showing up for work to make, manufacture, and move these things. But as it turns out, that shortage didn't manifest itself for a year and a half. And only now, at this point, are we beginning to feel that. And sometimes it's not because of the shortage of workers at all, even though the economists seem to think so. Although we have seen some encouraging signs in the last couple of days. I got a story in here somewhere, maybe we can pull that out later this week, of economists looking at that complaint about an excessive level of care for people who were suffering during the pandemic, and giving them extended unemployment benefits was keeping them from seeking work. Some states cut those off earlier than others, and the economists studied those that continued and those that cutting off, and found basically no difference in job-seeking habits and unemployment rates as between the states that cut people off and those that didn't. So that doesn't appear to be doing it. But it doesn't matter, because all the benefits, I think, have come to an end at this point, and unless they're extended again, people are going to run into this problem. But it might not matter, because the stuff they work on might never arrive from China, so who knows?
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, now you'll be listening to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next here. Gosh, what's on display today? Let's see. The Fulton County, Georgia prosecutor has turned up the heat on her criminal probe into Trump election meddling. That sounds like good news. We'll see if it works out. It is Georgia. Next.